Today's daf we're going to be learning is Chullin daf Yudchet. Today's daf is sponsored by Professor Jonathan Ben Ezra and Dr. Robin Zeiger. Thank you, Rabbi Michelle, for guiding us these past 6.5 years. 1 year from today, we will finish this machzor. That is on the Hebrew calendar on the night of Beit Sivan. Looking forward to celebrating with all of you. And today's daf is sponsored by Donna Hachhauser in loving memory of Rachel Bat Nisan. And today's daf is sponsored for the Refuah Shlema of Ravit Bat Eretz Shlomit. Okay. I will mention that we have now access to pictures that are going to go up on our site. You might like them, you might not like them. They're a little bit graphic in not a whatever way, but a little kind of inner parts of the animals. Some of them are a little nicer looking and easier to handle. Some of them are not, but they will really help us to get a sense of what's going on here. They're shared in the tools section of the website. On every daf, so at the bottom, toward the bottom of the page, you can click where it says pictures when there are pictures. They're from the portal Daf HaYomi, they're actually from the Morot Daf HaYomi Gemaras, which I actually have the physical Gemara with all the pictures in the back, but they're digitally available on the portal Daf HaYomi, and we're able to put them up on our site, so thank you to the portal Daf HaYomi for allowing that. And we'll be referencing them, and I'll be sharing screen with them to show you when it's necessary. I'll try to avoid some of the really disgusting ones. Okay, we're going to get started with our daf. So yesterday we ended the daf with the statement of Rish Lakish that there's 3 pkimot, the broken bone on Pesach, the ear of the firstborn, and the mum in kodshim, which, by the way, I forgot to mention. I remembered only after that I'd seen this, which is what's the difference between the mum in kodshim and the mum in the bechor? Because they're both blemishes in animals that are sanctified animals. So the reason why they added is because bechor is only male. And what they're talking about in the pgimat mum b'kodashim is specifically in the womb of a female animal that's supposed to be brought as a sacrifice, which isn't relevant to the bechor. So they mention the bechor separately from the mum in the regular sacrificial animals because they're talking about in female animals as well. Okay, and then we said that the size of them is the same, and Rav Chisda had added also the pgima and the sakin. These are all things in the knife, right, where there's something that's missing or some sort of, right, that ruins something. And then we said, right, Rav Chisda mentioned Chullin, whereas the first Rish Lakish wasn't talking about in the world of Chullin, and that's why he didn't mention the knife. And then we said that their pgima is like the pgima of mizbech. Okay, that when the mizbeach is missing a part, it's also ruined, and it's the same size. Okay, the size of these is like the size of an altar that's missing a part. Kama pgimat mizbeach, starting at the top of our daf. How large is that? Kedesh techgor bat ziporen. We're talking about if you put your fingernail across the altar and it catches on something, that's what we're talking about is a pgimat. Meitive, they bring a contradiction from a Tanaitic source, though. Kama pgimata mizbeach, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai omer tefach, Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov omer kazayit. One says it's a hand's breadth, and one says it's an olive bulk. That's bigger than when your finger just, kind of grazes on it and all of a sudden you feel it. That's much smaller than both the options. So the answer, lo kashi haba sida haba avna. There's 2 different parts of the altar. The altar was made of stones, but it also had this lime. It was plastered with lime, and that is the bigger amount. The lime is the pgima is more like a tefach or a kazayit of the structure of the mizbeach, but a stone of the mizbeach that has a nick in it, that is just a small amount that if you put your fingernail on it, and that's what the one that we were referring to. Okay, now we're going to talk about today's daf. Okay, I will warn you. I mean, you did see, for those who saw when I started putting up the screen before with the pictures are a little disgusting. We're going to be talking about different parts of the windpipe of the animal and where exactly you do the slaughtering. It's a little tedious and technical, but there's a whole other element of the daf that's super interesting, which is about difference of opinion between rabbis and how we view this, and in other words, how we view psak of rabbis, minhag hamakom, custom of the land, and people who move from one place to the other, what customs you have to keep. There's all sorts of other elements that are very, very interesting. So we're going to start off with this checking the knife. We learned that you have to check a knife. You have to send the shochet has to bring his knife to the Chacham of the city to check it. What if he doesn't? Okay, so this is a rabbinic ordinance. If you remember, the rabbis said you have to do this to show respect for the rabbi. Well, they took it very seriously. Amar Rav Huna, Hai tabacha de lo sal sakina kamei chacham. If you have a butcher or a shechter, slaughterer, who doesn't show his knife to the chacham, misham tinale, we put him in nido, we excommunicate him. Okay? Because people in general, it was known that people who don't listen to what the rabbis institute could get excommunicated. Rava says way worse than that. Ma'av b'rin alei. We take him away from his job. He can't be a slaughterer anymore. Machrizinan abisr de treifa. And we declare the meat that the slaughterer slaughtered as a treifa, not kosher. So he has to take a huge financial loss besides being excommunicated. V'lo pligi. Now they tell us, by the way, this isn't really a machloket. They're each just talking about a different scenario. We check the knife after. If the knife checks out to be fine, then even though they didn't ask the Chacham, it's okay. Well, it's not okay. We're going to excommunicate them, but we're not going to take them away from their job, and we're not going to call the meat a treifa. But if the sakin turned out have a nick in it after, now we don't know if it had it at the time, remember, but if they didn't check it with the Chacham and it had a nick after, then we're going to say your stuff is treif, and we're not going to allow you to slaughter in the future. Ravina Amar, you ready for disgusting? He says, if it turns out your sakin wasn't good, not only do we take you away from your job, and we say the meat's a treifa, but if we just say that, you could theoretically sell it to a Gentile, right? There's no problem of getting hana'ah, benefit from it, but they say, Ravina says, no, we're going to punish you more. It turns out your sakin wasn't good, okay, we're going to do mimasles lebeparta, which means we're going to put feces on top of it, okay? Smear it with feces, to make sure that you don't even sell it to a non-Jew. Okay, we want to make it disgusting so that you won't benefit from it at all. And again, this was the way the rabbi is saying, you have to take what we say seriously, and if you don't, we're going to penalize you. So yes, incredibly disgusting. There was a story of a slaughterer who didn't show his knife to Rabbi Bar Chinina. Now, without checking the knife, he put him in excommunication. He took his job away from him, right? And he said the meat that the person slaughtered is a treifa. Now, this is an interesting story. You have to wonder why this happened exactly. But when Mar Zutra and Rav Ashi came to him, he said to them, Rav Yochanan was very strict with this slaughterer, said to these two rabbis, can you go check into the matter? Okay, go check his knife. Rava didn't check his knife, this Rava Bar Chinina. But when these rabbis showed up, I guess maybe he was too busy, he said, can you go check it out? To tell Beit Tafle, he was feeling bad. He said, listen, his children are dependent on his income. Like, this guy now has no job. His children are hungry. Maybe he just, saw the situation and how bad it was, what he did, and he was feeling bad. And he said, go check out the knife and see what the story is. Badka Rav Ashi l'sakine v'nimtzeit yafa. So Rav Ashi went to check out the knife, and it turns out it was fine. And then he said the meat is kosher. So Rav Ashi paskined against Rav Bar Chinina, like it's a little tricky. Rav Bar Chinina sent him, on the other hand, Rav Bar Chinina paskined, and then Rav Ashi undoes Rav Bar Chinina's psak. So Amalei Mar Zutra, who was with him, right, says to him, "V'lo licho shmar l'saba." You're not worried for the elder, for Rav Bar Chinina, who already ruled against, and now you're going against his psak. Amar leish lichuta kavdina, and he said, he sent me to try to do this. So of course he wanted me to do it myself. So this is like an interesting question about, on the one hand, Rav Bar Chinina wanted to find a reason to exempt him from the severe punishment that he gave him, but then like Mar Zutra's thinking, but maybe you should have gone back to Rav Bar Chinina, let him undo his own psak. But I guess Rav Ashi felt like, right, if I don't do this now, right, time will pass, the meat will spoil. He really wanted the person to not suffer, so he did it immediately, and he felt like it was fine. It seems like it was fine what he did, but you could see the ins and outs here and the thinking, like, was that okay? The two of them went. Rav Ashi did this. Maybe you shouldn't have done that. Anyway, it's interesting to see the interactions and how they treated. Was this in respect of Rav Bar Chinina? It seems like it was. Amar bara Rav Huna. Shein tlusha. Okay, if you remember, just let's go back for a minute. The Mishna on Daf Tefav Amud Bet. It said bakol shochatim. You can slaughter with anything other than a magal katzil, a megira, and the shinayim and the tziporin. So now we're going to talk about the teeth and the fingernails. Okay, the claws of the animal, because they are chonkim. So now Rabbi Bar Huna says shein tlusha v'tziporin tlusha mutar lishchapa lechatchila. If the tooth is detached, or the nail is detached, you can use it for shechting lechatchila. So now they say, but our Mishnah said you can't use teeth and you can't use the nail. So how do we explain that? So shein lo kashya, habachada habitalte. Okay, shein b'shein is not a problem because one tooth you can use. It's sharp and you can use it like a knife. Two teeth, and the assumption is they're attached to a jawbone, and you have two, because if it's just two teeth separately, what's the difference between that and one tooth? But if it's two teeth attached by a jawbone, then you're going to basically cut and tear the animal, while you're shechting. So that doesn't work. Tzipor, not tzipor. So in other words, that it's not a contradiction anymore. One tooth is fine because it's like sharp, like the flint, right? It's just sharp implement. Two teeth attached to a jawbone is a completely different situation. And tzipor, not tzipor, lo kashya habetlusha habemechuberet. So the tziporen is attached to the animal. That's what the Mishnah was talking about. We talked about when we learned the Mishnah, right? The teeth are attached, but they don't have to be attached to the animal. They just have to be attached to the jawbone to be problematic. But the nail is attached to the animal. That's problematic. It's not attached to the animal. It's just separate. It's like a tooth, and it's fine. It's just a sharp implement, and you can use it for slaughtering. Okay, new Mishnah. Hashochet b'magal katzil. Okay, now we're going to talk about a magal katzir. Magal katzir has notches. Okay, it's a sickle used for harvesting, but the notches are angled. Okay, so imagine a sickle, right? It's a rounded implement with notches going all in one direction. So now, if you think about it, if they're going all in one direction, if you're going against the direction of them, right, where the nicks are hitting into, right, the sharp parts are hitting into the neck, obviously it's going to destroy the animal and make it a treifa before. But if you're going in the other direction, it's basically going to be a smooth cut. So if you're shochet b'magal katzir b'derech halichata, if you're doing it in the way that they're going, meaning in a way that it's not going to make any cuts, Beit Shammai poslim, they say no matter what, it's forbidden because, you could also, if you go one way, you could go the other way and you can end up then making the animal a treifa. Beit Hillel machshirim, but Beit Hillel permit it. Okay? Now, we're going to have to see in the Gemara what this really means, that they're machshirim. It sounds like it's kosher, the shchita. V'im echliku shineha, if you smooth out the teeth, harei kisakin, then it's just a knife. So even though it started off as a sickle with these sharp edges, but if you smooth them out, then it's not a problem at all. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba amar Rabbi Yochanan. But now we're going to bring the words of Rabbi Yochanan, who's going to understand the Mishnah a little bit differently. Af k'sheichshiru Beit Hillel lo ichshiru ela letahara midei neveila. Even when Beit Shammai said it's kosher, what he meant to say is it's kosher that we're not going to treat this like the severe law of a neveila, which has impurity, that the meat is impure. Ava, right, like b'maga, right, if you touch it, or b'masa, if you carry it, okay, doesn't have tumat neveila. Ava ba'achila asura. But of course you can't eat it. You can't use a sickle to slaughter an animal, even if you're going in one direction, and it's not going to necessarily cause nicks, because it's a sickle, and we said a sickle's no good. So Rabbi Yochanan understands the Mishnah that when he says machshirim, he doesn't actually mean it's permitted to eat the meat. He just means that we're not going to treat it like the severe neveila. We're going to treat it like a treifa. And Beit Shammai, who says poslim, it says we're going to treat it like a treifa. Okay? So, I'm sorry, like a neveila. So Beit Shammai is strict on the tumah, and Beit Hillel is lenient on the tumah. But both of them think, according to Rabbi Yochanan, that it can't be eaten. It's definitely not a kosher shchita, which is not how we understood the Mishnah. Now, Amar Rav Ashi, Dai Kanami. Rav Ashi is going to say, I can even further infer what Rabbi Yochanan said from the wording of the Mishnah. De Katani, as it says in the Mishnah, Beit Shammai poslim, uBeit Hillel machshirim. Look at their language. Pasul kasher, as opposed to, if you want to say the meat is permitted to eat, what would you say? V'lo katani, Beit Shammai oslim, uBeit Hillel mitirim. Doesn't say Beit Shammai forbid the meat to be eaten, forbid, and Beit Hillel permits. That would have been the language you would use if you wanted to say the meat is permitted to eat. You would have said mitirim. Beit Shammai says you can't eat it, oslim. Instead they use kasher pasul, which seems to indicate tum and tara. Okay, now the counter argument to this is v'litamech, but according to you, like the Stam Gemara says, but that's not a good argument, because litne Beit Shammai mitamim uBeit Hillel mitirim. According to what you're saying, the language doesn't work either. Kasher pasul doesn't mean tahor tameh. It should have said Beit Hillel mitaharim and Beit Shammai mitamim. Right? That would have been the language to use to say pure, impure. Ella poslinu machshirim v'oslinu mitirim chad miltihi. So the argument against Rabbi Yochanan is to say that no, Pasul and kashel is the same as asur and mutal. They're synonymous, and don't make anything of that. Okay, so what they do is they reject Rav Ashi's proof to support Rav Ashi's support that he brings from the language of the Mishnah for what Rabbi Yochanan said. Now, it doesn't mean Rabbi Yochanan's rejected. We're left with Rabbi Yochanan's position was the Mishnah was talking about neveila treifa, but everyone thinks it's asur. Or this counter opinion, which, right, it's kind of left open as to how to understand the Mishnah. Okay, moving to the next Mishnah. Now we're going to get into the background of the animal and how it works and the different parts and where exactly on the windpipe you can slaughter. So for this, I'm going to start sharing pictures. And we're going to see, okay, so here's a picture. It's a little small. I'm going to show you a bigger picture in a minute, but this is important. Here's the head of the animal, okay? Now, when you go, let's start from the bottom of the, like, lower down in the neck of the animal. I'm going to start with this is the windpipe, okay? Now, the windpipe, first of all, it's very helpful to have AI right now because you can, like last time I taught this, it was much more difficult to figure out all the reality of all this. I mean, Google did exist, but it wasn't as easy as it was for me to just put in Gemini and just say, you know, how does the windpipe what is the windpipe made of? How does it work? And it gave me a lot of information, which was helpful. The windpipe itself is made of cartilage and it sits inside these rings, okay? These are rings that go around. There's this whole slew of rings. It's hard to see on this picture so well, but this bottom part of the windpipe is just a series of rings. And it's a hard surface that basically protects the cartilage inside the windpipe, which is basically the part that, you know, will kind of take in the air and then, you know, make sure the dirt doesn't go in, spits it out, right, makes the animal cough it out. And basically the windpipe is inside these rings. Okay? Now, in between the rings, it's not a solid ring like all of this hard material together. The two things you want to understand about the windpipe here, the rings that go around it, is that number one, they're C-shaped. So they don't completely cover the whole windpipe underneath, okay? They only go around most of the way. The side that's open is actually covered by a muscle. And from what I read, it's like, because it's right next to the esophagus or the gullet, as we call it, sometimes like they interact there where the muscle is, okay, and it can contract and all that. So it's not completely covering it, which is important to know for our purposes soon. And the rings in between them, there's some cartilage together that connect them to each other. So they're not connected in this hard surface. They're separate rings that kind of go around. Then you see here, there's the tabat hagdola, okay? Above the tabat hagdola, in a minute we're going to talk about, I'm going to show you a better picture. And above the tabat hagdola, closer to the head of the animal, is this, it's called the kova, because it looks like a hat, okay, where it goes, I can imagine like a winter hat, you know, it goes like up and now it narrows at the top, okay, and there's a few things sticking out of there. Okay, so now I'm going to go down a little bit, and here's a picture of it sideways. So here's the kaneh, okay, which is again the bottom part, that's the actual windpipe that's covered with this kaneh. There's the tabat hagdola. Now the difference between the tabat hagdola, that's higher up, and it completely surrounds, okay, that's why they call it the gdola. It's one ring that completely surrounds the whole windpipe, as opposed to the rings around the kaneh that we talked about before that only go around most of the way, but not the whole way. Above that, you have the kova. There's what they call the shipui hakova. We're going to get to this later, where it starts to go in, okay, like here at the top, at the bottom part of it, where it hits into the tabat hagdola, the big ring, it's still kind of wide, and then it narrows and gets narrower at the top. Now, there's a few other things at the top here, which we're not going to really talk about so much, but there's like the point of it, which is, you know, again, it gets pointy toward the top. And there's this thing that sticks out over here, which is called the chite. They call it a chite because chite is a grain of wheat, and it looks like a grain of wheat. Okay, it sticks out here. There's two of them, I think. That's what they call chite in plural, but they stick out there. And it's near where the hat is already pretty narrow. It's near the top. Okay, those are some facts you need to know before we get started with the rest of our daf. So now we're going to read in the Mishnah, Hashochet mitoch tabat. Now we're going to assume they're talking about the tabat hagdola. If you slaughter specifically on the tabat, v'shir ba melo hachut al pnei kula. Now what you do is you completely, according to Tanna Kama, you completely cut at the tabat hagdola, okay, which is what he's basically saying is that's the right place to be cutting here. And if you leave a little bit, meaning that above, like you have a little teeny bit left of the tabat, meloach chut, that means like a thread, the thinness of a thread, you leave a little bit of the tabat agdola, meaning don't go above that. Okay, above that is already, like you don't want to be getting there. So you basically, and what he really means is you don't want to veer upward. Because if you veer upward, you have to leave a complete ring of a teeny little bit of the tabat agdola, meaning don't let your knife go further up, because that's called hagrama, if you remember. If you go into the wrong area, okay, the Mishna seems to say above the tabat agdola into the kova is the wrong area. So if you go up after, right, and you didn't cut completely this part, then it's a problem. Then, right, so if you left completely a teeny little hair around, and that means you only cut there and you didn't cut above, then shlitato kshera, then it's fine. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda omer, melo chut al pnei ruba. You only need the majority of this cutting to be in the tabat hagdola, in that ring. As long as you did, if you remember, all you need is the majority of both simanim. So if you cut the majority of the kaneh at the tabat hagdola, so the windpipe, you cut by this big round ring. You go around. You've gone, let's say, this C shape. Okay, you've gone. Not to be confused with the C shape of the other part, but you basically go around, do most of it, and then you veer upward into the kova. That's fine, according to Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. Why is it fine? Because as soon as you did the majority of the windpipe, you finished. So the rest of it is not considered actually part of your shechita. Okay? Now, that's what Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda says. Kam Rav and Shmuel. Okay, first Amoraim in Babylonia. Okay, today's going to be one of those sugyas, Babylonia versus Israel. Okay, Rav Shmuel de Amr Travayu Halacha ke Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. So first they say we hold like Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, as long as you did the majority and then you went upward, it's totally fine. But then they continue and they say Af Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda lo amal ela b'tabat agdola. No, that explains the way I explained it, which is this is only in the tabat agdola. Ho'il umakefet et kol hakaneh, because it completely surrounds the windpipe. Aval bishar tabaot lo. But you can't slaughter the if we're talking about where's the right place for slaughtering, it's only the tabat agdola. If you cut in the tabat ktana, okay, where those round rings are, the ones that basically cover the bulk of the windpipe, that's not a proper shechita. Now this sounds strange, isn't that where you're supposed to do shechita, right? We usually think of the windpipe, we don't just think of that part at the top of the windpipe. So he claims the shar tabaot lo. Now there's a big machloket among the Rishonim. What are we talking about here? I'm going to go with Rashi. Okay, I don't understand all the ins and outs of all these machlokot and what the meaning is behind it, but I'm just going to go with what Rashi says. Rashi claims, and that's why I told you these rings are connected with cartilage in between. And the claim is, what Rashi says is you're supposed to cut in the cartilage and not in the ring themselves, because the cartilage goes fully around, whereas the rings themselves don't, because they don't go fully around, it's not the right place to do shechita. Again, I don't understand exactly why, but they seem to say because it doesn't go completely around and it's this C shape and it leaves over a little bit, which is covered by a muscle, that's not the proper place for shechita. So according to Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, the way Rav and Shmuel understand him, and I say that specifically because we're going to see in a minute, maybe he doesn't say that, but the way Rav and Shmuel claim right now, or we think that they're claiming that Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda says this, is that the proper place for shechita is the tabat agdola, or, and again, the way Rashi explains it, or the cartilage in between these tabaot. Okay, and that's the proper place to do a shechita. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute, b'shar tabaot lo, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't permit the other rings? He's only talking about in the Mishna of the tabat agdola? Right, never said the word gdola in there, right? It just said tabat. So, and now we're going to say, v'hatanya, there's a braita that says Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda permits slaughtering the tabaot haktanot also. V'hatanya, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda omer, turning now to Amud Bet, hashochet b'shar tabaot, if you slaughter in the other tabaot, even though they don't completely surround the windpipe, since they cover the majority of it, it's totally fine, which actually makes sense, right? It wasn't so clear why, just because it covers the majority, it should be a problem. Well, you need to cut anyway as the majority, and, So, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda seems to say that it's totally fine to do that. So how did Rav and Shmuel say even Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda only said it by the tabat agdola and didn't allow any small rings when he actually says he does? Now, before we go back and answer this question, they quoted this braita, so they're just continuing to quote the braita, and Rashi points out to us, this is the rabbi's opinion, and it's not, we're talking about something else right now. Umugremet psula, Okay, so now what's mugremet? Now, that's from hagrama. Hagrama means if you move your knife upward and it's in the wrong place, right? You slaughter in the wrong place. So Rashi explains, what are we talking about here? Afilu ruba b'toch hatabad u'mi'uta lamala mitabad hagdola. In other words, even if you're mainly in the tabat and a little bit you go up, right? And that is psula. That's what we saw Tanna Kama in our Mishna. That when you're in the tabat hagdola, if you do the majority and then you go up, only Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda permitted that. According to the first opinion, you have to completely cut in the tabat hagdola. You can't veer upward at all. So that matches that opinion. And he, Rabbi Yochanan ben Antigonus, amogremet shikshera. Okay, Rabbi Yochanan ben Antigonus said this is actually fine, just like Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda had said in our Mishna. Okay, but that really isn't important for our purposes. So now we're going to say the following. I'm Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Tanna Kama. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda really did say two things, meaning he said his law in both places. When he said, we don't care if your knife veers up, and we don't care if you slaughter there, if you slaughter a majority, it works in the tabat hagdola, and it works in the tabat haktana. So Rav Shmuel, how do we explain them? They agree with him about the tabat hagdola. They didn't agree with him about the tabat haktana. And that's how they answered. What's the problem? V'halo amar ka'amre. V'halo amar ka'amre. But look at, okay, they're quoting lo amar ka'amre, which is, listen to what Rabbi Shmuel said. Rabbi Shmuel didn't say we hold like Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda in the tabat hagdola, but not in the tabat haktana, right? That's not what he said. What did they say? Go back to Amud Aleph. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda lo amal, that's the lo amar that they're quoting. Even he didn't say it, ela b'tabat hagdola. It sounds very clear that Rabbi Shmuel are saying Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda himself held that the tabat hagdola is not the same as the tabat haktana. So that's a weak answer. So they say the following. Hachi ka'amrei. No, what they meant to say, reread what they said. Okay, we're going to say it like this. Halacha k'moto. It's not he didn't say it. It's he said it in both, but we're going to paskin like him in one and not like in the other. Okay? Halacha k'moto b'tabat hagdola ve'en halacha k'moto b'shar tabaot. We're going to paskin like him in the tabat hagdola, but we're not going to paskin like him in the shar tabaot and the other tabaot. Okay? So in the end, what comes clear is that Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda thought that you can cut also any of those rings in the windpipe is totally fine. And even if you did majority and then went upward, it's fine. Same thing with the tabat hagdola. But Rav and Shmuel held like him specifically in the tabat hagdola. They don't allow it in the tabat haktana. Okay, now we get to our interesting story of Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera, if you remember, was an Emorah in Babylonia who makes aliyah to Israel. So Kisalik Rabbi Zera, when he went to Israel, he ate this stuff that Rav and Shmuel wouldn't allow, meaning he ate, it's not the mugremet we were just talking about, he ate the mugremet, which was meaning an animal that was slaughtered in the tabaot haktanot, okay, in the small rings, which Rav and Shmuel don't permit. So Amrele, they said to him, hey, you Babylonian, you come from Babylonia, don't you come from the place where Rav and Shmuel lived? Amar lahu, right? And therefore, why are you eating this? Rav and Shmuel don't permit it. Now in Israel, obviously, they did permit it. Okay? But Rav and Shmuel didn't, and they say, why are you doing, you're a Babylonian. You're supposed to do what the Babylonians do. Amar lahu. So now he says to them, Man Amra, who said this? Who told you Rav and Shmuel said that? I bet it was Yosef Bar Chia, okay, who's otherwise known as Rav Yosef. But you can see he's already speaking derogatorily to him because he calls him Yosef Bar Chia. Yosef Bar Chia mikulei alma gamir. Yosef Bar Chia got his traditions from all sorts of random people. And he doesn't really know what he's talking about. Okay? He said Rav and Shmuel said it. Who says Rav and Shmuel really said it? Shammai Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef heard this offensive statement that Rabbi Zera made about him, that he doesn't have good sources, right? This is like in the media today, right? They didn't have good sources, right? People quote, right? People don't check out their sources well. So Rav Yosef heard that people were saying that about him, and he got very angry. Amar, anamikole alma gemirna? You think I get my sources from just anybody, right? Kule alma means the whole world, right? You think I claim that Rav and Shmuel... Okay, I just want to point out, our Gemara just said Rav and Shmuel said it, but obviously Rav Yosef must have said that someone said that Rav and Shmuel said this, okay? So he said, what, you think I just get my sources from anyone? No way. Anami Rav Yehuda gemirna. I got my traditions from Rav Yehuda. Now remember, Rav Yehuda he studied with Rav. When Rav died, he went to study with Shmuel. He's the best source, right? He's the one who's quoted the most times in Shach, quoting Rav and Shmuel. And he's so careful about I know that my source is very careful because afilus feke de gavragaris. He even says when he's not sure who said it, I'm not sure who said it. Okay, here's a statement where he does that. To Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. He quotes Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba as saying, Safek mishmei de Rav, Safek mishmei de Shmuel. I'm not sure. In other words, he quotes Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, who said, right? Rabbi Yehuda quotes Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, who said what I'm about to say. I'm not sure if Rav said it. I'm not sure if Shmuel said it. Okay, the content isn't important, but we're going to learn it anyway, which is to permit a bachor and say a bachor has a mum. That's what we started with today. If a firstborn has a blemish, usually you have a chacham, right, a rabbi who's a specialist who says, oh, this is a blemish. But if you don't have a specialist, then you can go to 3 regular people, and if the 3 of them together agree, then it's sufficient. So there you have it. Okay, here's our source, that he obviously is very careful about who he says what from. Okay, so that's the end of the story, basically, although we're not finished yet, but that's what happened. Rabbi Zera didn't hold like Rav and Shmuel. People said, why didn't you? And then he mocked Rabbi Yossi, but Rabbi Yossi says, no, I know my sources are good. Now the Gemara says, wait a minute, Rabbi Zera lately, and I saw some people were referencing this in the chat, right? This is the classic, you keep a custom, right? You have a custom. When you go to a new place, the main, actually, I saw you're talking about kidneyot, the main really is the issue of 2 days of yantif, right? Where do you live, and what if you go to Israel? Do you keep 1 day, 2 days? Okay, this is like the big sugya for that. So what does it say here? You're supposed to take on the chumras of the place that you left and the chumras of the place that you go to. So if there's chumras that you brought from home, you have to keep them. If there's chumras in the new place that you didn't used to keep, you have to keep them as well. Amar Abaye. So how did Rabbi Zera not keep the chumrah from Babylonia? So Amar Abaye, we're going to have 2 answers to this question. That perhaps this principle is not true in all cases. Okay, so comes Abaye and he says, Hanimile, maybe it depends on the direction, where you're going. Hanimile mi Bavel v'lebavel. Maybe if you're in Babylonia, you're going to another place in Babylonia. Or me Eretz Israel, or from Israel to Israel. Okay, yes, this comes up, I see you're asking, in Makom Shenagu on Arvei Pesachim, in Erev Pesach. Erev Pesach, there's a minhag not to do work on Erev Pesach from the morning, and there's a whole chapter called Makom Shenagu, and a lot of it deals with these issues, the 4th chapter of Pesachim. So, Hanimile mi Bavel to Bavel, or Eretz Israel to Eretz Israel, Inami mi Eretz Israel to Bavel, or even from Israel to Babylonia. But mi Bavel Eretz Israel, but if you're going from Babylonia to Israel, kevan da'ayan kaifina lehu, because we defer to them, meaning the Babylonians defer to the Eretz Israelim, because Kiddush HaChodesh, it was just Rosh Chodesh yesterday, right? It was determined in Israel, when they would do the Kiddush HaChodesh and they would bring the witnesses, Israel would determine the date for everybody else. Okay, and the Babylonians had to listen to the Israelis on this. Therefore, Avdin and Kavatai. So when you go from Babylonia to Israel, you're allowed to do what the Israelis do, even if it was more lenient than what you did before. And this is one of those sugyas which is showing the centrality of Israel, even though, right, in those days it was moving, and it was a way of the rabbis in Israel trying to establish themselves as the center, even though they were really losing the center, because most of the big Talmidei Chachamim were moving out. Okay, Rav Ashi Amar, a different answer. Afilu tema mi Bavel Eretz Israel, even if you say that from Babylonia to Israel, you still have to keep the Chumrah. Okay, and there's nothing to do with geographical, which way you're going, and the centrality of Israel. But that's only, this is where the big sugya comes up in how many days of yantif you keep. That's if you're planning to go back. But Rabbi Zera, he was never planning to go back to Babylonia. He was planning on making Aliyah and staying there. Now, obviously, we all know when you make Aliyah, no one ever really knows you're going to make it or not. You might end up going back. But his plan was to stay there, and because he was planning to stay there, he doesn't have to keep the chumras of the place he left. And that's why people who make Aliyah do not have to keep 2 days of yantif. Okay, I'm not getting into the people who come visit. All the other issues about that, there's many different opinions on that. But if you're not planning to go back, then you don't have to keep your chumras anymore, right? It makes sense that you keep your chumras if you're going back, because you don't want to forget them, right? And then you go back, and then, okay. But there's another question here, which is Amar le Rabbi le Rav Yosef, another issue which is going to weaken this whole question against Rabbi Zera, like why didn't he keep the chumrah? Because Rabbi says to Rav Yosef, but wait, the rabbis who came from Machoza, city in Babylonia, said, okay, now the Bach takes out the next 3 words, so I'm going to read after that. Mishmei de Rav Nachman, in the name of Rav Nachman, mugremet kshera. Rav Nachman actually didn't hold like Rav and Shmuel, and he permitted it. So, and then maybe Rabbi Zera, right? And then he's saying, why is this assuming all the Babylonians, right? Like Rav and Shmuel, we see that Rav Nachman said otherwise. Amarle, Nara, Pshate. Says each river, right, the river goes in its own way. And basically, there's many different customs in Babylonia. So it was clear now what we thought, right, in the way they kind of questioned Rabbi Zera, how did he do that? As if all of Babylonia was strict with, like Rav and Shmuel. It turns out it wasn't. There were different customs in different places, like the Machosa, they had like Rav Nachman, and they permitted it. Okay, so there were all the different customs about how to slaughter. You can see how complicated it must have been in those days, like who would eat by who, because everyone had different opinions about which kind of shechita is okay and which is not. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Akshir b'chuda dekova. He permitted the uppermost point of the hat. Okay, we're talking about that reed, the kaneh, and the windpipe, and the top part where the chod is. Okay, that's here. Okay, this part right here, that's the tip. Even there, okay, which is very far from where the other people were permitting it. Okay, he permitted even there. Karya le Rabbi Yochanan gisa. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, Gisa. Now, there's difference of opinion what Gisa means. First of all, Gis is a brother-in-law. And Rabbi Yochanan was the brother-in-law of Rish Lakish. If you remember the story where Rish Lakish sees how beautiful Rabbi Yochanan is, sees a reflection in the water, he dives in after him, then he realizes he's a man. And Rabbi Yochanan says, if you come, put all your energy into Torah, I'll give you my sister. And he marries his sister. So could be saying, what? Are you my brother-in-law? Like, you crazy? Of course you can't shech there. Okay, some people say it means something else. Either which way, it's a derogatory way of saying, how on earth are you permitting this? Amar a puppy, Mishmei de Rava. Okay, the last sugya now is going to be about these chitim. Okay, here's the chitim. Like I said, it looks like a kernel of wheat, and it comes out. It's near the top. Okay, it's already where the hat is narrower at the top there. So Rav Papi says in the name of Rava, we're going to have Rav Papi, not to confuse him with Rav Papa, who's also going to say in the name of Rava, and they're going to have two different opinions about this. Paga b'chite treifa. If you hit into the chita. The chitim, then it's a treifa. Okay, we don't really know what this means, so the Gemara is going to ask, Paga unaga behem, dichtiv vayifga bo vayamot. Okay, they quote a pasuk where it says vayifga bo vayamot. He hit into him and killed, right, and he died, which means basically physically there, which basically means, are we saying if you slaughter there because it's too high up? Remember, it depends who you are, but most people said that's already above the tabara dola is no good. So, or certainly once the kova starts getting narrower and the chitim are at that height where it's already narrower. So, if you cut there, it's no good because you can't slaughter there. It's not the right place. It's again going back to hagrama, slaughtering in the wrong place. O dilma paga velo naga, or do we mean that you were lower than that? Okay, you were somewhere on the kova here. Okay, like a little bit lower than that. You were close to, like lifga b'mishu often means to meet them. As it says, Kediktiv vayifgu ubo malachei Elohim, right? The angels met him. This was Yaakov, right? So now they met him. They didn't touch him. They weren't up against him. They were a little before. So then we're basically saying if you cut, right, if you're like past where the kova starts getting narrower, we're not even up to the chitim, and you shech there, it's no good. Okay, so either which way, we don't know which one he says. We don't have an answer to this, but somewhere around where the chitim are. Okay, either there or there, something like that. Now, Amra Papa Mishmei de Rava Shiyer b'chitek sheva. If you leave, now this is obviously pagavanaga. If you slaughter by the chitim and you leave a little bit, meaning you slaughter around right where they are, it's actually good. So he permits. It's not exactly clear where exactly, but it sounds like as long as you leave some of the chitim intact, then you're fine. Okay, you can even slaughter. It seems like even closer to the end of the higher part of the chitim, it's fine. Amar Meimar, so we have this machloket, what Rava said about where exactly you're allowed to slaughter, how high up can you go. So Amar Meimar, Mar Bar Yenuka, Hava Ka'imna, Kameda Rav Chia Bered Rav Avia. I was in front of Rav Chia Bered Rav Avia, but Amar Li Shir B'chitek Shera. And he said, as long as you leave a little part of the chitim, it's fine. Amar Li Ravina Le Rav Ashi, Amar Li Rav Shemen Misuvra. Okay, unclear where this place Suvra is. It doesn't really appear anywhere else, but some city. Ikla Marzutra la'atrin. Marzutra came to our city. V'darash, and he taught Shir b'chitek sheva. Actually, is permitted. Okay, so these rabbis all seem to be permitting that spot. Mar Rav Ashi Amar paga b'chitek shera, Shir b'chitek treifa. He says if you cut on the chitim shera, but if you leave over if you go too high and just leave a little bit of it, then that's no good. Okay, so we have again unclear exactly where he draws the line, but he draws some sort of line there of part that's good, part that's not good. And I'll just read the next sentence of tomorrow's daf, and we'll finish there. Hilchatam mishipoi hakova ulamata kshera v'hainu deshir bechite. If you go from the part where it starts to get narrower, or the kova, where the hat gets narrower, it's okay, and that is called shir bechite. Okay, when you're right where the shipoi hakova is, that's called shir bechite. They were all permitting, and that's permitted. Anywhere above that is going to be a problem. Okay, and with that, we finished our daf. So we started with the p'kimat mizbech and the p'kimat of those three things, and they're like a p'kimat mizbech, and we talked about the difference between in the structure of it or in a nick in one of the stones, and the shear for each one was different. We talked about what the penalty is for someone who doesn't show their knife to the Chacham. From there, we got into the contradiction with the shein tlusha and a tziporin tlusha, which works, but then we saw it doesn't work. Right, and then in the Mishna it doesn't work, and then we distinguish between the two cases. And then we got to the magal katsir, which seems to work according to Beit Hillel, but then we said maybe it just means it's not a neveila, it doesn't have tuma, but maybe it's really not kosher at all. And again, that would be only if you're going in the direction where it's not going to hit into all the notches of the knife. From there, we got into this whole thing about what's the highest point at which you could check the animal on the windpipe. Okay, specifically we're talking about the windpipe here, not the gullet, but we're on the windpipe. At what height of it, and even below, wasn't clear, right? We have this machloka, Rabbi Shmuel and others, whether you can even do it on those rings below, and maybe there's a problem because they don't cover the full they're not a full cover of the windpipe, whether you could do it there, and from there, we got into these different, we got into some interesting topics about holding, right? First of all, earlier in the daf, we had, the rabbi sent them to undo his ruling almost, and then they did, and was that okay? And then here we have mina kamakom, and do you have to hold by the chumras of the place you came from, under what circumstances? And, the whole story of Rabbi Zera, where he didn't hold by the chumrah of Rabbi Shmuel, even though he was Babylonian, the people didn't understand why he wasn't doing that. And then we had some explanations, and then in the end we even said maybe all the Babylonians weren't even holding like Rav Shmuel anyway, proof from Rav Nachman, and then we ended with exactly, what's the status of the shchita by the chitim. Okay, it's not 100% clear, even the Gemara was questioning what exactly are the definitions and where the line's drawn, and the commentaries have difference of opinion, so if you walk out saying, I don't know exactly where to slaughter, first of all, most of you I assume are not slaughterers, so it's okay, but it's a little unclear in terms of, you can see it's a classic Gemara of they talk about these things as if everybody knows where they are, and then the commentaries have difference of opinions. So both what they mean, what does it mean paga? Why are they using that language? Does it mean before? Does it mean at the spot? And all that. So there's a little lack of clarity about how to understand all of this. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day.